All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul. To thank Avraham and Shaindy Kelman for dedicating all the Shum Droshos this month in memory of their parents. May the Neshamas have an Aliyah and the family a Nechama. And to thank Milton Melanie Gertner for dedicating the Daf Yomi and the Succah for Shoshana Tova Bas Mendel Leah. We hope that she, together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, will have a complete and enduring refuah. So with that, let us begin. Sorry. Okay, excellent. So today's daf is Lamed Vav 36. We are picking up Emir Hashem on Lamed Hey Amud Beis, and I believe we left off with the Imnotel Kshira, which was 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17 lines up from the bottom. So remember again, this is part of the sugya of using an esrog of Meiser Sheni. Right? So remember again, the Mishnah said you cannot use an esrog of Meiser Sheni. So we saw in the Gemara, that's for two different possibilities. Either because since everything was put in water, ultimately you're machshir the esrog l'kabel tumah and run the risk of the esrog itself contracting tumah. Or the other possibility is ibnesha mafsida, which means ultimately what? Because over the course of Yom Tiv, you end up going ahead and using the esrog, you end up just diminishing the outer peel of the esrog itself, which is a diminution to Meiser Sheni. But then the Mishnah said, V'imnotel kshera. However, so as much as you're not supposed to use an esrog of Meiser Sheni, if you did use an esrog of Meiser Sheni, ultimately you are yotzei. So the Gemara says, why is that? L'man damer v'nei she'ein bo heter achila divrei akol. So we'll say, so remember again, if you hold that the lachem determinant is heter achila, so does Meiser Sheni have heter achila? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Everyone could eat Meiser Sheni. L'man damer lefi she'ein bo din mamon. So, and according to the opinion who says that in order to satisfy the lachem criteria, so edibility is not enough, but you also need financial ownership. So does Meiser Sheni satisfy the criteria for financial ownership? And the answer is that's a machlokes, you know, Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanon, because everything depends on how you view the nature of Meiser Sheni. Remember, again, we saw yesterday's daf, Rabbi Meir holds that Meiser Sheni is mamon gavoa, that it belongs ultimately again to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In that case, there is no financial ownership. But if you go according to the Rabbanon hold that Meiser Sheni belongs to the individual, and therefore halacha l'maisa satisfies the criteria of financial ownership. Beautiful, says the Gemara Vayter. We'll say now we transition a little bit into the halachos of esrog itself. In other words, the blemishes or disqualifications of an esrog. So it says the Gemara also chazozis. So remember again, chazozis, Rashi translated it as abu baos, which literally means boils or blisters. So you have a chazozis on the esrog. Amrav Chisda, davar ze Rabbeinu Agadol amro hamakom yeh ba'azro. So says Rav Chisda, Rabbeinu Agadol, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said this particular halacha, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu agrees with him. We're going to qualify when is chazazis a problem. Lo shanu ela b'makom echad. When is a chazazis problematic? Only if you have a chazazis in one area. However, aval b'shnayim u'shlosha makomos kasher. But if you have a chazazis or a chazisim, right, in 2 or 3 different places, then that's not a problem. To which the Gemara says, Amalei Rava says, what are you talking about? Adarabba, I would say just the opposite. B'shnayim u'shlosha makomos havile kiminumar upasol. I will say another psul for esrog is what's called menumar. Menumar literally means spotted, right? So if the esrog has spots or blotches all over it, ultimately again that's a psul. Why is that a psul? On a most basic level, it's a fundamental lack of hiddur. It just is not beautiful. It's just not beautiful. So therefore, again, the Gemara says, if you have a chazazis or chazisim on 2 or 3 different places, that by definition should invalidate the esrog because it is menumar. Ella itmar asefa itmar. The Gemara says, let's reframe this a bit. How do we reframe it? Amiuto kasher. If you have a chazazis on a small part of the esrog, it does not invalidate the esrog. Amr Rav Chisda, davar ze Rabbeinu Hagadol amro. Rav Chisda comes along and says, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi qualified this and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should support this ruling. Lo shanu ela b'makom echad. When do we say that a chazazis is not problematic? That's only if it appears on only one spot of the esrog. Aval b'shnayim u'shlosha makomos. But if the chazazis appears in 2 or 3 different places, havele kimenumar upasol. Ultimately, again, then it's menumar and it's pasal. So Rabbi said it's actually very interesting. The appearance of a chazazis, and this happens all the time with esrogim, the appearance of a chazazis, or like a blister or boil-like protrusion on the esrog, does not necessarily invalidate the esrog. Right? Now again, if it appears in 2 or 3 different places on the esrog, then we have an issue that the esrog is a spotted esrog, right? A menumar esrog, and then it will be possible. However, listen to this, Rabbi say, this is probably one of the most important halachos of hilchos esrog. Amar Rabba, va'al chotmo va'afilu b'mashu nami pasul. Rabba says, however, if the chazazis, or for that matter, any blemish appears on the chotem of the esrog, that invalidates the esrog. So there happens to be a 3-4-way machlokes about the definition of chotem. But just for our purposes, for that purposes, for bottom line, Daf Yomi purposes, if you can imagine as follows, the chotem is effectively the area of the esrog where the esrog begins to narrow towards the top, right? So remember again, let's just assume we're also focusing over here on a typically shaped esrog, which is wider on the bottom, widest at the middle, and then begins to slope in or becomes more narrow towards the top. The chotem is the part of the esrog where the esrog begins to narrow going up. Again, I sent out some pictures. And this is picture 175. You can begin to see it a little bit. You can go to 175, 176. Again, there's a lot of machloksim over here. We're not going to get into the machloksim, but suffice it to say, when looking at an esrog and wanting to see the kashrus of the esrog, the part you want to focus on most is the top part from where the esrog becomes more narrow. Any discoloration on the chotem can disqualify the esrog. Specifically, again, black dots, things like that would disqualify the esrog. So again, so there's 2 halachas that come out of here. Number 1, if an esrog just has a chazazis, a regular we'll call it boil or blemish, that would not necessarily disqualify the esrog. If there's 2 or 3 of them, that would disqualify the esrog because halacha l'maaseh, the esrog now becomes menumar, spotted. When checking for the kashrus of the esrog, we want to look at the chotem, right? We want to go ahead and look at towards the top where the esrog begins to narrow to make sure that that is clean and blemish free. Let's say, it's also an incredible most if you think about it. The esrog is domel aleiv, right? It's domel to the heart. So as much as it would be wonderful to say that the goal is to have a blemish-free heart, it doesn't quite work that way. Are there people who have a blemish-free heart? Absolutely. Do most of us have a blemish-free heart? Absolutely not. But the goal is what? Don't let it be menumar. Don't let it be menumar, right? Don't let it be spotted and speckled. Don't have too many blemishes. And furthermore, on the most ikar parts of your heart, right? The most profound parts of your heart, the chotem, that top part, that really has to be blemish-free. There has to be a part of me that's blemish-free. There has to be a part of me that is kulo kaddish. The entirety of me, that can't be kulo kaddish. It's just not the way it works. There's always a chazazis somewhere. But some part of my life, some part of my heart, some part of my persona, I do have to carve out an area in my life where I am blemish-free. It's an incredible yesod. You don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be excellent in everything. But I have to be excellent in something, right? There has to be something where I carve out and I say, you know what? This is what I'm medactic in. This is what I'm going to try to be perfect in. This is what I'm going to try to be blemish-free in. Now, the trick in life is choosing the right thing, right? Because sometimes what ends up happening is we're medactic in the wrong areas, right? In other words, I could be medactic in something, and it's a good thing, it's an important thing, but I'm like over the top medactic, and this is actually not the area that requires that level of diktuk, right? That level of adherence. It's important, and often, again, we have to go on, but often what ends up happening is we try to find perfection in areas that are easiest for us to find perfection because it's low-lying fruit, but those are not necessarily the areas of life where I need to go ahead and achieve some level of perfection. So the bottom line, the hashkafa that the Gemara is trying to teach us is that the lave is often not blemish-free, but I have to carve out an area that is, but you also can't allow yourself to live with too many blemishes. And I have to make sure that I carve out an area in my life and my persona that is blemish-free. What to choose, what to focus on, that requires a lot of deliberation, right, and a lot of forethought. To which the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, "Not la pit masa." I said this is probably the most common case. Pitum comes off. Pitum comes off. So remember again, what did the Mishnah say? If the pitum comes off, what was the lashon of the Mishnah? Not la pit maso. I'm sorry, I'm just looking for not la pit maso niklaf nistag puzzle. Right? So again, we know this halacha. If the pitum comes off, it's puzzle. But I'll say very important qualification. Tan Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar, not la buchanto. That's only if the buchanto came off. Now, I will say the truth is, I think I sent you a picture of this as well. I think there was a picture of this. Yeah, the truth is, it's very simple. If you go ahead and you look at picture, I don't think I printed all the pictures. You have picture 176? Good. Just take a look at 176. So this is right, the esrog lying down. So again, you could just see this. Actually, we don't even need a picture if you don't want. The pitum is made up of two parts, right? There's like the circular bulb part on top. That is called the shoshanta. And then there is the stem part. The stem part is what the Gemara is calling the buchanta. Buchanta. So the Gemara says like this. When we talk about that if the pitum is removed, the esrog is puzzle. So if the shoshanta, if the bulb part itself comes off, but the stem part remains, the esrog is still kosher. The only time the esrog becomes invalidated is if the pitum in its entirety comes off. Both the shoshanta, the bulb, as well as the buchanta, as well as the actual stem. This is actually very important, we'll say, because the truth is very often when you have esrog accidents, which, you know, most esrog accidents occur within 1 mile of the home. That's what they say. Right? So if you have an esrog accident, very often, people don't realize this, there is often a part of the pitum that remains. As long as there is some part of the pitum that remains, that esrog is kosher. It's not hadar. It's not hadar. So, for example, if this happened on the first day of Yom Tov before you had an opportunity to use your esrog, it's better to go ahead and borrow someone else's esrog as a matana. Definitely better. But Allah says, as long as there's some part of that pitum that remains, your esrog is technically kosher. And you'd be surprised, more often than not, when you have esrog accidents, there is it's rare that the entire pitum just snaps off. It's more common that it's dropped, the shoshanta, the top part comes off, part of the stem comes off, but as long as something remains, your esrog is bidi evid kasher. Good. Niklaf, what if the esrog is peeled? Amrava high esrog da aglid ka'ahina sumka kshera. This is very interesting. If you have an esrog that was peeled, right, and also we pointed out, an esrog actually has a very thick peel. When we talk about the esrog being peeled, what they're really referring to over here is the outer peel. Let's say you totally have an outer, right, the esrog, the entire outer peel was removed, and as a result, the esrog becomes colored like a reddish date. Because, once that outer rind is removed, ultimately, again, then, I guess because of sunlight, the coloring changes. Let's say the esrog becomes the coloration is like a reddened date. Ultimately, it's kosher. Gemara says, really? Va'nan tinan niklaf pasal. But we learned that if an esrog was peeled, it becomes pasal. So what's going on over here? Lokashya tap of lamid vav ha bekula ha b'miktsasa. This is very interesting. If the esrog is missing part of its peels, parts of its peel in different places, it becomes pasal. Right? Why does it become pasal? Spotted. Right? It's minumar. But if the entire outer rind ultimately again was removed, then what? Then it's kosher. Interesting halacha, right? Part of the peel, but again, part of the peel is removed. It's not puzzle because it's peeled. It's puzzle because the appearance now will take on one of a spotted menumar esrog. But if the entire outer rind is removed, and therefore as a result the coloration changes, that esrog will be kosher. Nistak niket, if the esrog is split, or the esrog is perforated, punctured, tani ula bar chanina, nikev nakav mafulash b'mashu v'she'ena mafulash b'ki'eser. So I'll say ultimately again in terms of the invalidation, if the esrog is pierced, right, and the piercing goes all the way through, then even the smallest hole that is created will invalidate the esrog. She'ena mafulash, however, again, if the esrog is pierced in a way where halacha l'maisa, the piercing does not go all the way through, it's only problematic if the hole is the size of an isser. Isser is the size of a coin. By Rava, what's an interesting case? By Rava, nol duba esrog simani treifa mahu. Very interesting case. What happens if your esrog develops simani treifa? The Rava say simani treifa refer to open up that animal, put its lungs in a receptacle. Ultimately, again, you could pour it from one utensil to another. So reish nishbachal kakiton, if you have a lung that has liquefied and could be poured from literally utensil to utensil, the halacha is that it is kosher. Rava gives an important qualification here. V'hu dekaima simfunha. That's only if the bronchial tubes are still intact. In other words, there has to be some part of the lung that is still in a solid mass, that is still there. If the lung has totally liquefied, then halacha l'maisa, it's problematic. But if the lungs themselves have liquefied, but the bronchial tubes are still intact, the animal is still kosher. Halo kaimi sifuna treifa. But again, if the bronchial tubes themselves had liquefied, then the animal would be a treifa. Okay, so we'll say, so that's the halacha. You just got a little bonus material. You just got a little hilchos treifa of animals today. Great. Let's listen to this. Hachamai. What about a parallel case by esrog? In other words, we'll say, so what's the parallel case? So listen to this situation. Imagine the interior of the esrog. So let's say the innermost esrog is, let's say, the area where the seeds are contained. So what would happen if the area around the seeds totally liquefied? Right? So the interior of the esrog liquefied, but the outside was intact. What would be the status of such an esrog? Hachamai. To which the Gemara says, Dilma, if you look at Rashi, it's actually Rashi right across. Hachamai, im nimuach v'kaimi simfunha dahainu chedre hazera shagar ina besocha. So we'll say what the bronchial tubes are to the lungs. So the inner area, what the Gemara calls the chedre hazera, the seed chamber, which is the area where the seeds are contained, right? If that area, so what happens if the entire area of the esrog liquefies, but the seed area is intact? Is that the equivalent to the bronchial tubes of the animal being intact or not? So Dilma hasam hudlo shalid ba'avira haderbari. So maybe the only reason I will say, because you think about this for just a moment, if the lungs liquefy and the bronchial tubes are intact, why wouldn't that render the animal a treifa? So the Gemara says maybe because everything is quote unquote locked in the animal, there's the possibility for it to regenerate. Right? That's why the animal is not called a treifa. The bronchial tubes are intact, the lungs could regenerate, and you could be okay. However, aval hacha, the shatlet ba'avira, but an esrog, right, which is much smaller and exposed to the elements, maybe saruchi misrachas. Maybe even if the seed chamber is intact, if the area around it has liquefied, that esrog is done. Odilma, loshno, or maybe there's no difference, and maybe again, just like by the animal, as long as the bronchial tubes are intact, the animal is not a treifa. So too by the esrog, as long as the chedre zera, right, as long as the area where the seeds are contained is intact, even if the area around it liquefied, the esrog will still be kosher. So that's the shaila. Listen, this is the shaila in halacha. So the Gemara tries to prove it from the Brisa. Tashma, esrog tafuach saruach kavush shalok. So we'll say if you have an esrog, tafuach literally means it's decayed. Saruach means it has rotted. We'll discuss what that means. Kavush means you pickled it. Interesting. Shalok, you went and you cooked it. Kushi, black esrog. Lavan, white esrog. Minumar. Ultimately, again, minumar is spotted esrog. All of these cases, pasal. All of these cases, right? The esrog is we spoke about this before. Pasal. Esrog kikador, pasal. Ultimately, again, if you have an esrog that ultimately, again, is like a ball, then it is possible. Others say also if you have a twin esrog, the esrog ultimately is possible. So I will say now, what's a twin esrog? So a twin esrog is kind of like, if you could imagine like a peach that has like the split down the middle. So if you can imagine if you had an esrog that grew with a more pronounced split, to the point that it looks like two esrogim in one. I think there was a picture of that in the pictures I sent you also. You could take a look, right? So again, that's called an esrog hatiyom and will be pasul. The Yishon hatiyom, esrog haboser. So again, when we go through this whole brayso, esrog haboser, and we'll say esrog haboser is an immature esrog, right? An esrog in its early stages. Rashi says haboser katan kapul halavan. It's tiny. It's tiny like a white lentil. So what happens there? Rabbi Akiva polsa cham machshirin. Rabbi Akiva says it's tossel. The chacham say it's kosher. We're going to go through each of these cases. So the Gemara says cham machshirin. Gadlo b'defus. This is an interesting case. What happens if you grew the esrog in a mold? If you can imagine like this. When the esrog is young and immature, you go ahead and you wrap you put it into it's still on the tree. You put it into a mold. So this way again, it grows in a certain form. Agadlo bidfus va'asok min beria acheres. So again, you went ahead and you made it in different shapes, like a different creation. You decide you want to make a new brand. You like they make these like the kids chicken nuggets in different shapes. You decide you want to start a kids esrog line. You want to make esrog that look like dinosaurs, right? It's a new marketing niche. So you put it into a defus. So the Gemara says that's possible. That's possible. Now we're going to go through all of these cases. Katani miyasar. We'll say now. Remember, what's our shaila? What are we dealing with over here? We want to know that if you have an esrog that has liquefied on the inside, but the chedrei zera are intact, like the treifa, it's not treifa, like the animals whose lungs have liquefied, but the bronchial tubes are intact. What is the status of such an esrog like that? So we'll say look at the Gemara. Katani mihas tafuach saruach. Now, if you notice again, the Gemara listed two different psulim. There is tafuach, which we translate as decay, and there is saruach, which we translate as rotted. Now, the truth is, when you hear that, it sounds like what? They're the same thing. Obviously, if they're being listed separately, they're not the same thing. To which the Gemara says, my love, tafuach mi bachutz, visaruach mi bifnim. Are we not talking about a situation? It must be that decay, right? Tafuach means rotted on the outside, and saruach means rotted on the inside. In which case, again, if an esrog has any level of decay, whether it's external decay or internal decay, ultimately, and the esrog should be invalid. To which the Gemara says, "Lo, idi bachutz." Actually, it's not true. Both of them are referring to decay externally. Velo kasha had de tafach afagav de lo sarach, had de sarach afagav de lo tafach. To which the Gemara says, "No, look at Rashi for just a moment." Rashi says over here, "Sarach, my love, tafuach mi bachutz, shenifchas v'nirkav mi bachutz." So the Gemara, the Havamina is that tafuach means external decay, and saruach mi bifnim. Rashi says, "Uklipaso kayemes kimin reya shnishvachal kiton." Now both say now saruach would seem to be the case where the externality of the esrog is intact, right? The inside, the internally, it is decayed. Kind of like the case of the animal whose lungs have liquefied. And yet again, you see that it's possible. To which the Gemara says, Lo tafuach afagav de lo sarach, sarach afagav de lo tafach. What is this? Take a look at Rashi. Tafach kigon shenaflu gishamim bitalush, v'tafach v'sarach nirkav, v'shnachrina tafach nirkav sarach reach ra, machmas lo shachlu. To which the Gemara essentially says, no, what tafuach and saruach means, essentially, if the esrog experiences any level of external decay, right? Any level of external decay, whether it's a more profound level of decay, a smaller amount of decay, the rice is coming to tell me such an esrog will be possible. And Abasi, you have to understand something. All of these psulim make a lot of sense. Why? Because at the end of the day, right, what makes the esrog unique? What is the defining characteristic of esrog? Hadar, right? So it makes a lot of sense that at the end of the day, anything that goes ahead and takes away from that hiddur in a significant way is going to undermine the kashrus of the esrog. Good Rabbi says, so that takes care of that situation. Now halacha l'maisa. So therefore, I just want to point out, when I say takes care of it, we actually don't have an answer to our question. So the question about whether or not, if the external part of the esrog is intact, but there is internal decay, is the esrog kosher or not? The Gemara does not answer that question, because it turns out that tapuach and saruach both refer to what? Different forms of external decay. Neither of them are talking about internal decay. It's actually the shaila about whether or not an esrog that has experienced internal decay, but the chedrei zera are still intact, that question remains unanswered. By treifa, we know that such an animal, interestingly enough, as long as the bronchial tubes are intact, the animal is not a treifa, But Allah again by esrog, the Gemara leaves it unanswered. Amr Mar, esrog kushi pasal. So we learned that a black esrog and esrog kushi is pasal. Aiva tanya esrog kushi kosher. But yet we learned in a brayso that a esrog kushi is kosher. A black. So we'll say, which one is it? Is a black esrog pasal or kosher? To which the Gemara says, dome kushi pasal. So the brayso, interestingly enough, says an actual esrog kushi is kosher. A dome kushi is pasal. What does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. This is very interesting. Dome kushi is shagadol kan b'haru shachar. Let's listen to this. So the brayso says, if you have a genuine Ethiopian esrog, which means an esrog grown in Ethiopia that is naturally black, that's the way, remember again, I both say, that's the way esrogim apparently grow in that region, that esrog is kosher. If you have an esrog that grows, let's say, in Eretz Yisrael or Bavel, that looks like an esrog kushi, right? That's not kosher. Why? Because that's an aberration. So what the Gemara is essentially saying is like this. If you have a natural grown esrog kushi in Kush, that esrog is kosher. But if you have an esrog that looks like an esrog kushi but grows in a different region, ultimately that esrog will be pasal. To which the Gemara says, Amar Abaye, kitna nai maslisin dom kushi. You're right. When the Mishnah says, so therefore it's a kasha. The brayso says that a genuine esrog kushi is kosher. But if you have a black esrog that grows in a different region, that's not kush, the esrog will be pasal. But yet our Mishnah seems to make a blanket statement that a esrog kushi is pasal. What's going on over here? Torah says, "Nasana kitna nai maslisin dom kushi." No. Our Mishnah is also dealing with what? Dom kushi. Our Mishnah is dealing with the case of a black esrog that grew somewhere outside of Kush. That esrog is pasal. To which the Gemara says, Rava Amar, lo kasha, halan v'haluhu. There's another distinction, Rava says. It depends who we're talking about. Rashi says like this. Rashi says that at the end of the day, halan in Eretz Yisrael, an esrog kushi is pasal. Because in Eretz Yisrael we don't have esrogim like that. Right? But look at Rashi, halan v'haluhu, second wide line. Liola masnisin kushi nami pasal, v'lo kasha masnisin l'bnei Eretz Yisrael, sherechokim Eretz Kush, ve'ina regilim bahem, brayso l'bnei Bavel, shekrovim l'kush, regilim lahen. So Gemara Rava makes a much simpler distinction. One, right, when the Mishnah says esrog kushi is pasal, that's talking about for Bnei Eretz Yisrael. Because in Eretz Yisrael they didn't have black esrogim. In Bavel, they did have a black esrogim. So in Bavel, interestingly enough, the use of a black esrog was permitted. In Eretz Yisrael, the use of a black esrog was prohibited because it was not the norm. Incredible. I will say, again, same idea. What's problematic with a black esrog? Well, it depends. If it's not the normal growth in your region, then it lacks hiddur. If it is the normal growth in your region, then it possesses hiddur. So Rava says, in Eretz Yisrael, it's not hadar. In Bavel, it is hadar. That's the distinction. Esrog aboser, so we're going through the brayso now, which is very, very interesting. Esrog aboser, so which is a very small esrog. Rabbi Akiva posel cham makshirin. Rabbi Akiva says it's possible. The chacham say it's kosher. Amar Rabba, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon, Amru davar echad. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon, in fact, they espoused the same ruling. Rabbi Akiva had the Amran. So Rabbi Akiva, as we just said before, Rabbi Akiva says that esrog aboser, a very small esrog, is going to be possible. What did Rabbi Shimon say? Rabbi Shimon maihi, decided Rabbi Shimon poter es ha'esrogim b'kotnon. Interestingly enough, Rabbi Shimon holds that a very small esrog is poter from trumas and maasros. That's how he paskins. Why? Because since it's not a fully formed fruit, therefore halacha l'maisa is poter from trumas and maasros. So the Gemara wants to say Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon are really saying the same thing. Rabbi Akiva is saying you can't use a really small esrog. Why not? It's not an esrog. An esrog is a fully formed fruit. And Rabbi Shimon says a very small esrog is poter from trumas and maasros. Why? It's not a fruit. So therefore they're saying the same thing. Amalei Abaye says maybe not. Domalohi ad kalokam Rabbi Akiva hacha dibainan hadar v'leka. It could be that Rabbi Akiva holds that Allah l'maisa by esrog. The reason if it's very small you can't use it is because by esrog, remember again, the driving force in Hilchos Esrog is hadar, 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 hadar. It's all about going ahead and making the pri beautiful. I should say using something that is beautiful. So if something lacks physical beauty, that's an invalidation by esrog. If it's so small, it's simply not hadar. So the Gemara says, "About hasam kirabana." But Rabbi Akiva will say might hold that in the world of trumas and maisrus, maybe even a very small esrog would be chayav in trumas and maisrus. Inami ad kalakan Rabbi Shimon hasam ela dechsib aser ta'aser es kol tvuas zaracha kiderech shebnei adam otzin lizriya. Furthermore, again, Rabbi Shimon might hold that small esrogim are not subject to trumas and maisrus. Do you know why? Because the pasuk says, "What should you tithe? Kol tvuas zaracha." Only a type of fruit from which you could go ahead and retrieve seeds to plant the next cycle of crops. But if you have a fruit that's so small that it would not, remember, I'll say, if you take a very small immature esrog, those seeds will not be capable of producing the next crop. That's why Rabbi Shimon says, because remember again, the way the Torah phrases the tithing obligation is, what should you tithe? Kol tvuas zaracha. Literally, again, the tvua, the grain of your seed. The way Rabbi Shimon darshans is, you only tithe something that is capable of producing seed, which could in turn plant something else. So if you have immature esrogim that are not capable of planting seeds to perpetuate the min, to perpetuate the species, you don't have to tithe it. Aval hacha kirabanan svirli. But maybe by esrog, Rabbi Shimon would agree with the Rabbanan that even a very small esrog is fit for you. So mostly all the Gemara just did is it was natural to want to group Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon together because they're both disqualifying small esrogim. Rabbi Akiva disqualifying it for the use of esrog, Rabbi Shimon disqualifying it from the tithing obligation. It's natural to group them together, to which the Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe not. It could be, but it's also quite as possible that they actually disagree with one another. Good. Amud Beis. V'sulamidi. I always love this. The Gemara says V'sulamidi means there is nothing more to talk about on this topic, right? This is great. Let's say, every once in a while, the Gemara sounds like our parents, right? Conversation's over, right? Conversation's over. We're done here. V'sulamidi. Which I will say, by the way, if you think about it, why does the Gemara have to say stuff like that, right? What Rashi says over here, Ein lodun achar davar zeh, the lo savar Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara says, we're done. Rabbi Shimon doesn't like Rabbi Akiva doesn't like Rabbi Shimon. Why does the Gemara have to say that? Why the need to say that? So I will say, first of all, because sometimes in Gemara, subjects are left opened. So it's, and that requires further exploration. And sometimes, again, the Gemara is saying the case is closed. We'll say it's an incredible yesod in life to try to know what things you should pursue and what things you should let go. Right? This comes up in the realm of interpersonal relationships all of the time. Right? There's an issue, there's a machlokes. So you go ahead and sometimes you reach some level of resolution on the machlokes, but it's not full resolution. Sometimes you have to be a bikech, you have to be wise in life to know, when do you continue to pursue something in an effort to go ahead because you want more clarity? And when do you let things lie? When do you just, because we'll say, even though sometimes we want absolute clarity with certain things, at the end of the day, many times in life, there's not absolute clarity. Do you push or do you leave it alone? Do you pursue a certain course or do you leave it alone? Do you continue the conversation or do you leave it alone? And what the Gemara is teaching us is that sometimes for the greater good and for the sense of greater accomplishment, you have to learn when to let things go and move on. Because we'll say we could keep on talking about Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon. We could spend a whole Masech on Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon, but that's not a worthwhile pursuit. So the Gemara sometimes has to tell us v'su lo midi. We'll say it's a good mantra for life, especially if you get embroiled in machlokes, right? Or you get embroiled in disputes. Sometimes it's a good thing to say v'su lo midi. Okay, I'm done. This is not a good place to put my energies anymore. This is not a good place to put my kochos. It's not productive to continue down this path. Su lo midi, we're done. I'm going to direct my energies now towards more productive outlets. Incredible yisod. God lo b'defus. If you go ahead and you grow the esrog in a mold, v'asokim in beri acheres pasal, and you want to make it in a different shape, ultimately, again, it is pasal. To which the Gemara says, Amar Rava, Lo shana elakim in beri acheres. only if mamish, like you're making it into a different shape. In other words, I will say, if you want to go ahead, you have a great idea. You want to make an esrog that looks like a cluster of grapes. So you have a mold and you put it so the esrog grows like a cluster of grapes. Or you want to make it look like the Malach Gavriel, whatever the Malach Gavriel looks like, whatever that is. So the Gemara says, okay, that's possible because it no longer looks like an esrog. Aval kibrioso. But I will say, see, this is actually very interesting. If you want to put it in a mold to make it look like the perfect esrog, which I will say, I think it is an incredible marketing idea, right? In other words, think about this. You have a mold of the perfectly shaped esrog. You put that around the growth so that as the esrog matures, it grows in that perfect gidel, in that perfect shape. Kosher. That's kosher. That's fine. I'm sure if it hasn't been done, there's a reason why it hasn't been done. To which the Gemara says, Pshita. Okay, that's obvious because the Brisa said, Kimin beria acheres. The Brisa was explicit. When can't you use a mold? You can't use a mold to make the esrog look like a different type of creation. To which the Gemara says, Lo tzricha da'avide dapi. Rabbi say, ultimately, again, you made the esrog dapi. The case of dapi, this is one of the pictures. This was picture 183. Rabbi say, you can see the mold that was made, where essentially dapi means you make the esrog almost looks like an accordion esrog, where there are indentations, at every. So it actually happens a little. It actually looks very pretty. You made it dapi. So the Gemara says, this is the case kibriaso. In other words, we'll say if you made it like this, it's kosher. Why? Because at the end of the day, you haven't changed the actual form of the esrog. What you've done is you've made a design in the form. If you've made a design in the form, that's fine. When the Gemara says, when is it possible? If you do something to fundamentally change the form and make it look like something else. In other words, when you look at that picture 183, that esrog still looks like an esrog, right? It still looks like an esrog. But at the end of the day, it just has a design in it. That's going to be okay. If you were to fundamentally change the actual shape into something else, that's when it becomes problematic. Incredible. Says the Gemara. Look at Rashi. Yeah, good. That's also Kabriya, fine. The Gemara says, Itmar, Esrik Shenakvu. So Rabbi say, so again, I want to point out, Halach Lamaisa, the use of a mold is okay as long as you don't change the fundamental shape of an esrog. So even if the mold itself makes a design in the esrog, that's picture 183, you're making a design in the esrog, but you didn't change the shape, that's okay. When is it problematic to use a mold? If you're fundamentally, you want to make your dinosaur esrogim, you want to make your Malach Gavriel esrogim, you want to make your cluster of grapes esrogim, that's when it's problematic. Good. Itmar esrog shenak voach barim, but an interesting case. What if you have an esrog and mice nibbled on the esrog? Mice nibbled on the esrog. Now, nakvu literally means they pierced. They pierced the esrog. So Amar Rav ein zeh hadar. So Rav says, look, it's not hadar. It's not hadar, and therefore you should not use it. Ini, is that true? Supposed to listen to this. Ini, vaha, Rabbi Chanina, matbil ba, v'nafik ba. But I'll say, what did Rabbi Chanina do with his esrog? This is great. He was dipping some esrog dipping sauce, right? You got a couple of sauces in front of you, right? You have your esrog dipping. What would he do? He would dip it. He would take a bite out of it, and then he would go ahead and use it for the mitzvah. Pretty incredible, right? The Gemara says, by the way, that's problematic on a variety of levels. Rabbi Chanina, kashya masnisin. Now both say the Mishnah explicitly said that an esrog that is chaser, right? Which means an esrog that is missing part of it, which inevitably happens when you take a bite out of it, is puzzle. So what's going on over here? How could this esrog be kosher? So bishlama masnisa mechanina lo kashya. So the Mishnah, according to Bechin, is not problematic. Why? Can be Yom Tov Rishon, can be Yom Tov Sheni. They will say when the Mishnah says you can't use an esrog that's chaser, that's referring to the first day of Yom Tov. Because again, as we've seen and we'll continue to see this, the stakes are higher for the mitzvah of esrog on day one. So when can't you use a deficient esrog for the mitzvah? That's day one when the mitzvah is daraisa. When did Rabbi Chanina dip and bite? That was when? Day 2 and on. Ela l'Rav kasha. But according to Rav, right? Rabbi Silber again, Rav holds that an esrog that is deficient is not hadar. So ultimately again, how could Rabbi Chanina go ahead and take a bite? Remember again, Rav said if the mice nibbled on the esrog, it's not kosher because it's no longer hadar. So we would assume it's the same thing if you're taking a bite. How can you take a bite out of it that lacks hidur now? So what's very interesting? Amar lecha Rav, Shaindy achbarim demaisi. But this is actually very interesting. Rav will make a distinction between a bite made by the owner of the esrog versus a bite made by mice. When mice nibble at something, the item becomes disgusting. When a person takes a bite out of their esrog, the esrog doesn't become disgusting. They become deficient. So because it's chaser, that'll be problematic for day one use. But chaser could technically be speaking be used from day 2 and forward. It's a very interesting distinction. So Rav will prohibit you using an esrog that was nibbled on by mice because that lacks hiddur, because it's disgusting. But an esrog which you took a bite out of could technically speaking be kosher for day 2 and on use. Very interesting. Ige de Amri, an alternate version of this, Amarav, Zeh hadar. This is still hadar. Rav would say, even now in this version, Rav is saying that even if the esrog was nibbled on by mice, it's still usable because it still possesses hiddur. How do we know that? Daha, Rabbi Chanina mat bilba v'nafik ba, because Rabbi Chanina would dip his esrog and take a bite out of it. So you see from here that even if the esrog is missing a piece, it's still hadar. To which the Gemara says, "O Rabbi Chanina, kasha masnis." And according to Rabbi Chanina, what about the Mishnah that says you can't use an esrog that's chaser? Lo kasha, can be yom tov rishon, can be yom tov sheni. Again, when can't you use an esrog that is chaser? That is ultimately again on yom tov rishon, but on yom tov sheni you can. Okay, so two different versions, I will say, of the discussion. Esrog katan, you can't go ahead and. So we'll say, by the way, just so you should know that halacha l'maisa we do paskin that way, that under certain circumstances, an esrog that is chaser, right, an esrog that is missing part of it, can technically, under certain circumstances, depending on where it's chaser or how it's chaser, be kosher for use from day 2 and on. It will not be kosher for use on day 1. So again, not advocating the Rabbi Chanina model of the dip and bite, right? This is the classic esrog dip and bite. So we're not advocating for that because clearly it's not l'chatchila, but it is interesting to know that halacha l'maisa on day 1, biting your esrog will invalidate it, but from day 2 and on, depending where you bite it, how you bite it, how much you bite out of it, could technically be kosher. Esrog katan. So remember again, the Brisa said a very small esrog ultimately will be invalid. So also this is very interesting. Amar Avraham, so I'm sorry. Esrog katan, this is back to the Mishnah. So Esrog katan, the Mishnah discussed what is the smallest shear for esrog, the smallest shear for esrog. So remember again, the Mishnah said, shear esrog katan. Rabbi Meir says ke'egos, the size of a walnut. Rabbi Huda says kibeitza, the size of an egg. So the Gemara points out something very interesting. The Gemara says, Amar Avraham bar Papa ke machlokes kan, machlokes ba'avonim mikurzalos. So we'll say the same machlokes that appears over here by esrog is the same machlokes that appears by wiping stones. Well, so remember again, this takes us back to Shabbos and Erevin. The way they used to wipe themselves is with sharpened stones. We spoke about this part. Do not try this at home, and don't Google it either. It's probably not gonna be a good idea, right? So I'll say, so the idea over here is so sharpened stones for wiping. So the Gemara says the sanya. So we'll say we're talking about over here is actually this is great hilchos muktzah. This is not hilchos hotzah. Stones are muktzah on Shabbos. Again, stones are muktzah on Shabbos with qualifications. We learn the smichas chaver with qualifications. There are ways to make stones not muktzah on Shabbos, before Shabbos, I should say. So listen to this. The sanya. B'Shabbos, Shabbos, you're allowed to go ahead and take 3 stones with you for wiping purposes. Either muktzah, Shabbos say essentially muktzah's d'Rabbanan. Chazal relaxed their prohibition in a situation of kavod habrios, human dignity. So because wiping after one defecates is an issue of human dignity, Chazal relaxed their halachas of muktzah. How many stones can you take with you for wiping? 3 stones. 3 stones. So the Gemara says, "V'kama shi'uran." What's the size of those stones? Rabbi Meir Omer ke'egos. Rabbi Meir says the size of a walnut. Rabbi Yehuda Omer kebeitza, the size of an egg. So all the Gemara is just pointing out over here is, by the way, that the size, right, the size machlokes that appears by esrog, interestingly enough, also appears by avanim mikurzalos, the wiping stones as well. Very interesting. So the Gemara goes right to ubegadol kadesh yochaz. So then when it came to the upper limit of an esrog, we had another machlokes, right? What was the machlokes? So here I both say the larger size of an esrog. So the Tanakama says it has to be kadesh yochaz shnayim biyado. An esrog could only be so big that you could hold 2 esrogim in your hand at once. Rabbi Huda and that was Rabbi Huda, right? The largest share of an esrog could hold 2 esrogim in your hand at once. Rabbi Yossi says even 1 esrog in 2 hands. Even one esrog in two hands. Says the Gemara, Tanya, Rabbi, this is incredible. Tanya, on Rabbi Yossi, Meiser Rabbi Akiva, Shebala Beis HaKnesses. One time Rabbi Akiva came to shul. Listen to this. Ve'esrogo al ksefo. He was carrying his esrog on his shoulder. That is one zaftig esrog, right? That is one big esrog. Holding it on his shoulder, the Gemara says. So again, so what you have over here is Rabbi Yossi saying, obviously you see, you could even use a huge esrog. Rabbi Akiva is coming with his esrog slung over his back, and it's Rabbi Akiva. To which Rabbi Huda will respond, it's incredible. Amar Rabbi Huda, Misham Raya, don't bring a ride from that story. Afheim Amrulo Ein Zehadar. Yeah, Rabbi Yossi, the only one problem, you're only quoting part of the story. You know what the end of the story is? The end of the story is the other Rabbanim Beis Medrash say, Akiva, what is that? Right? What's up with that? Right? That's not an esrog. That's not hadar. That's not beautiful. They told him you're not yotzei with that. You're not yotzei with that particular esrog. I will say, have you Shulchan Aruch paskins? You can use as big of an esrog as you want. There's no limitation. Now, again, from a practical perspective, like we saw the Gemara said, because often you have to do some maneuvering with your lulav and your esrog. So on a practical level, conventional wisdom is use something smaller that can be held in one hand. But technically speaking, a person could use a very large esrog if they want. I will say, I think that there is a beautiful, beautiful Moshe Haskell in this Gemara that, the Gemara frames it as Rabbi Akiva comes into the Beis Medrash and he has esrogo al ksefo. His esrog is on his shoulders, and they tell him, Ein zeh hadar. It's not beautiful. So we'll say perhaps what the Gemara is also trying to teach us is a very profound lesson in mitzvahs. That sometimes in life, a person walks around with their mitzvahs al ksefo on their shoulders. They walk around with a feeling and emoting this idea that mitzvahs are such a burden, that it's something I have to do. I schlep around Torah on my shoulders. I schlep around mitzvahs on my shoulders. I do it. I do what I have to do. But the truth is, it's a peckle that sits on my shoulders. Not Chashon Rabbi Akiva was doing this, just a metaphorical message from the Gemara. Sometimes I walk into the Beis Medrash, I walk into the shul, I walk into my house, I walk into my mishpacha, and the mitzvahs are sitting on my shoulder. And you know what happens when you walk around with mitzvahs sitting on your shoulder? It's true. Do you get the job done? Do you fulfill the obligation? Absolutely. You know what the problem is? Ein zehadar. It's not beautiful. That's not the way to be a Jew. Right? The way to be a Jew is to recognize that it is a privilege to serve. It is a privilege to be an Eved Hashem. It is a privilege to have Torah. It is a privilege to have mitzvahs. It's a privilege to have the responsibilities that we have. Are they responsibilities? Yes. Are they sometimes overwhelming? Yes. But it's the whistle while you work mentality. I have to work, right? I have to work hard. But at the end of the day, what a privilege it is. And by the way, this is the key to successful chinuch. Because if our children see that we treat our Yiddishkeit as another thing to do, then they'll grow up without that love of it as well. So Rabbi Akiva walks in, and the esrog is on his shoulders. And Chazal, the rabbis say, if that's the way you're operating, that's Rabbi Akiva. This wasn't Rabbi Akiva. But again, if I bear everything like a burden, ein zahadar. Ultimately, again, this is not beautiful. Abba said, let's just do the Mishnah, then we'll stop. Mishnah, Ein Ogdinas Halulav Ela B'mino. Did Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Huda says, if you go ahead and you have to bind the lulav, right? We have an ongoing machlokes. Does the lulav have to be bound or not bound? There's an ongoing dispute. If you go ahead and you bind the lulav, you can only bind the lulav with mino. Mino means one of the daled minim. Div Rabbi Huda. Rabbi says, no, afilu bechut b'mashicha. You can even bind it with a string of linen. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Meir, Ma'aseh ba'anshe Yerushalayim. Listen how beautiful this is. The Raya, Anshe Yerushalayim, she'ogdin es lulavein bigimonios shal zahav. In Yerushalayim, they used to bind their lulav with strands of gold. So that seems to be a raya that you could bind your lulav with whatever you want. No, you can't bring a raya there. In Yerushalayim, what they used to do is they would bind the lulavim with the actual one of the daled minim. And then on top of that, they would put beautiful strands of gold. But we'll stop over here. I'll pick up Miras with the Gemara tomorrow. Shkoyach.